Welcome to our webinar. We have a wonderful topic today going over how to maximize your profitability and grow your PM business. Also looking at how to scale and implement these strategies that we're talking about and just benchmarking. So a lot of really good topics here. And we have a wonderful presenter here. He is an expert in the property management field. He has run his own property management company and grew it and sold it. And now he is on the consulting side and working and helping other people from what he has learned in his expertise. So we are really blessed to have Brad Johnson here, the CEO of ProfitCoach. But instead of me telling you all about him, I'm going to pass it over to Brad and let him tell you a little bit about himself. So, Brad, thank you so much for being here. We're really excited to have you.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Yeah, so my name is Brad Johnson. Good to meet you guys. I'm the CEO of a company called ProfitCoach. We help companies, property management companies, um, grow highly profitable self-managing companies. Do that through financial and operational insights. Certainly something that we're going to talk about today. I live in Wilmington, North Carolina, which is a beautiful coastal beach town in southeastern North Carolina. And like Ben mentioned before coming on at Profit Coach, I was the CEO of a fairly large single family rental company here in Wilmington called Sawyer Property Management, now called SPM Residential Services. I was a non-owner operator, so I ran the business on behalf of the owner. And then when the time came in 2023 to sell the business, helped execute that sale. And then after that, decided to move on to run Profit Coach, a company that I've admired for a long time from a distance and have known the leadership, but got the opportunity to come on board at the beginning of last year. So most important part about me, my wife, her name is Kayla, and I have three beautiful children, all under the age of 4. So I live a really crazy life with a low amount of sleep, but I don't know that anybody has more fun than I do. So it's a good time.
Well, welcome, Brad. We really appreciate you being here and sharing your expertise with us. So, thank you so much for being here. So we got a lot of stuff to talk about. I real quick want to just go over our agenda, make sure, like I said, everyone knows what we're talking about and we're on the same page. So we're going over three main things. We're going to be going over the 6 financial metrics that drive profitability, how to benchmark your company against industry leaders, and then also how to scale your team and streamline the operations. So to really get us started off, we're going to start with the profitability area and those 6 keys. And not surprisingly, the first one we use is profitability. So, can you discuss what profitability metrics people should be using to measure their success and why these matter, Brad?
Yeah, absolutely. So, to start out, just to give a little bit of background, we at Profit Coach, and I say we, obviously, those who were here before me did most of the groundwork here, but we created benchmarking studies along the way through the years to get a really good understanding of what the current status of the financial impact of property management companies, and particularly doing those studies to try to understand what are the key levers and the key drivers of profitability for property management companies. And so the 6 keys we're going to talk about today are the 6 things that most have an impact and most drive profitability in property management. And the first one, no surprise here, it's profit margin. So what we did when we did those benchmarking studies is try to standardize using the NARPM chart of accounts, something that I'll probably talk about a couple times here. Try to standardize the chart of accounts and some of the different variables that you see in property management company P&Ls in order to establish what is the average company's margin. And then anytime I say benchmark, I'm talking about the top 25%. So in the study, the top quartile, what is the average of the top quartile? That's the benchmark. That's where everyone wants to be. And what happened was we did the study and found this shocking thing that the average profitability in property management, the first time we did the study was 8%. It might have even been 6% when we looked at the preliminary data before that. Yet the benchmark profitability was 3 times higher. And so the numbers you're looking at here are from 2022, the latest benchmark study that we did. And you can still see that that trend is present. There's something unique that is happening in our industry where the average company has a fairly low margin, but the average excellent company, benchmark company, has 32% margin. And there's a few reasons this really matters. The first one is there's a lot you can fake in your business on the revenue side. And fake is probably too strong of a term, but you can juice up your revenue numbers by adding in all kinds of things that may not be very efficient or profitable in any way, but you can grow your revenue and feel really good about the state of your business. But the bottom line of the business, the bottom line of any business is actually the bottom line. It's that net profit or EBITDA, whatever you want to call it, net operating income line that indicates, well, here's what you're actually earning. Here's what you're actually making as a PM company. And it's very possible to be in the 30s or even the 40% in terms of that profit margin. That's certainly something that I worked really hard to do at Sawyer, and we got to that place, thankfully. But the key behind this and the reason why profitability matters so much is you see it right there on the screen. It fuels the entrepreneurial engine, right? Growing your revenue, growing your door count, making your company bigger. If you're not actually doing that in a way that's sustainably profitable, you're really just creating a bigger and bigger headache for yourself or a bigger and bigger beast to manage. But if you are doing it in a way that's efficient and profitable, you're actually starting to get money from the business and do it in a way that's much, much more sustainable for the future. So that's why we say profitability fuels the entrepreneurial engine. And, that conviction has only grown over time for us. As we've seen, our mission statement at ProfitCoach is to help people become and achieve more than they thought possible. And, part of what we do in order to help you get there is build highly profitable companies, which really matters, but also self-managing companies, which matters just as much. Because if you have a really high profit company, but you don't have the self-managing aspect and you're still working 60, 70 hours a week in your PM business, putting out all the fires, that money won't do you a whole lot of good if you don't get the freedom of time to enjoy it. And we'll talk about that a lot more in the second part of the webinar. But just real quick on this, you see adjusted and unadjusted. We adjust owner compensations to a normalized scale so that we can compare apples to apples. Some owners pay themselves a really small amount. Some owners pay themselves way too much for what the business state is. So we adjust the owner comp in order to make sure, because there is some freedom there, in order to make sure that we're comparing apples to apples.
I love it. I love it. So looking at the second pillar, which is labor efficiency, what are some of the industry standards that we should be looking at? And also just kind of how do these matter and why are we looking at them?
Yeah, so labor efficiency, the metric here is called DLER, direct labor efficiency ratio. That's a measure of how many dollars of revenue do we generate for every dollar we spend on labor. And when I say, and direct labor specifically, when I say direct labor, I'm using the word direct in contrast to something like management labor. Management labor is like director of ops, CEO type work, time spent managing other people. I'm talking about the sort of work that's directly correlated to output, like accounting, property managing, leasing, things like that. So this matters a lot because we call it the desert island metric, right? If you had to pick one thing that would be the most predictive and the most indicative of what is the state of the business and how well is it running, it would be DLER. How many dollars of revenue do we generate for every dollar of labor? And the reason is labor costs are almost always by far the biggest cost in running a property management company. So if you can get more revenue out of the same amount of labor or get the same amount of revenue out of less labor, two different ways to increase your DLER, you can have a really good engine there of efficiency. And so what you're looking at is the average DLER is 2.9 and the benchmark DLER is around 4. So, okay, what difference does that make? That means that for every $100,000 of direct labor, the same group of people in the benchmark group are bringing in $400,000 of revenue versus $290,000 of revenue. So we're talking about between two companies, same labor costs, $110,000 more of revenue. Well, almost certainly all of that revenue drops to the bottom line as profit because it's coming from the same amount of labor. So really, really important metric.
In terms of the keys that really drive, DLER, how do these keys connect to basically how one is approaching profitability?
Yeah, so we call them the three P's, right? Productivity, pricing, and pay. Productivity is just the efficiency of the team. What are you getting out of your employees? Pay, making sure that you're paying your employees a fair market wage that is aligned to their position. So you should always think about productivity and pay together. That's the right people in the right seat doing the right work for the right cost, for the right expense. $30 an hour employees shouldn't be doing the same thing that a $10 or $12 remote team member might be doing. So making sure the work is aligned to the expense correlated there. And then on the last one, that's pricing. I'll park on that for just a minute, which is to make the point that there's a difference between value and fees. This is coming up a lot in the property management industry lately because you're seeing a good amount of conversation from a regulatory standpoint around what some people are calling junk fees, or admin fees, or what have you. And the the issue there is that, at least the accusation is that, some fees that are being charged in property management are junk. They're not correlated to actual value. And I think what has happened, maybe the reason for that, and I would say in a lot of ways our industry is being kind of unfairly targeted on this, but what's often happening is monetization and the desire to make money off of something you're doing actually is getting ahead of value creation. So those are two different things. Monetization fees are what people pay you, and monetization is how you are getting paid. But the most important thing, and the thing that kind of sits at the base of all of that, is value creation. What kind of value are you creating? And making sure that you are only charging fees for areas where you're actually creating value. Not only is that good from a regulatory standpoint, it's really good from feeling good about the operation that you're running. Like, are we just trying to get as much money out of everybody as we can? Or are we creating value and then with a lot of confidence standing behind that and saying, hey, we've created this value for you. It makes a lot of sense for us to charge a fee here because look at the value creation behind what we're doing. So those are the three P's that really drive DLER: pricing, productivity, and pay.
Perfect, perfect. In terms of the next pillar, which is revenue per unit or RPU, what are the benchmarks people should be aiming for? And let's talk about the impact on how this hits profitability too.
Yeah, totally. So the answer for what are the benchmarks that people should be aiming for, the answer there is a bit of it depends. There are standard average and benchmark RPUs. Average $222 per unit per month in revenue. And then the benchmark group, almost $100 more in revenue per unit than the average group. The reason why it depends is a lot of your revenue, for most people, it's most of their revenue, comes from a management fee. And that management fee is often a percentage of rent. So if you live in, I was just talking to a client in Long Beach, California. If you live in Long Beach, California, but I operate and operate there, but I operate here in Wilmington, or let's even say, a small Midwestern town, the rents out there are like 4 to 5 times what they are here. And so their revenue per unit is automatically going to be way higher than mine, even if I'm doing everything right. So we relativize revenue per unit with average rent. So take that revenue per unit, and as a function of average rent, what percent is it? We call that RPU, aggressiveness. And you can see the table down here. If your average rent is under $1,000, you want roughly, oh yeah, there you go. You want roughly 10 to 14% of revenue per unit relative to rent. If your average rent is like 1,000 to 2,000, you want to be more in the high teens. And then if your average rent is over $2,000, you want to be something like 20%, 18, 19, 20% of revenue per unit as a function of average rent. And then you've got this down here on the bottom. I'll explain it real quick. This pro tip of how a 10% increase in RPU can actually double your profit, a 100% increase in profit. For example, if you're at $150 in revenue per unit and $15 of that is profit per unit, right? You're running at about a 10% margin and you make just a 10% bump on that 150, you find a way to drive $15 more of revenue per unit, but you do it in a way that doesn't have a correlated expense. So a better pricing strategy or some sort of pet fee program with a guarantee, a couple things that are pretty common to drive RPU. If you do that in a way that doesn't actually increase your expenses, everything that you've just added to your RPU drops straight down to your profit per unit. So if you added 15 to that 150, you've also added 15 to the 15 in the profit per unit, and all of a sudden you've doubled your profits quite literally. And sometimes it can be that easy. Usually there's something involved, there's some expense involved, but driving RPU often really drives that bottom line profit.
I love it. I love it. In terms of profitability, it seems logical that expense to revenue is something we need to measure. How are we actually measuring this, and what are we kind of looking at when we're trying to measure and gauge our success here?
Sure. I'll go a little quicker here because this kind of gets in the weeds. And as I'm sure Ben will mention, all of these benchmarks in this guide, it's in the NARPM Financial Performance Guide, which you can access. And if you want to reach out to me afterwards, I can help contextualize some of this as well. But you have to pay really close attention to these sort of other expenses: payroll taxes and benefits, facilities expenses, other operating expense, which is just kind of bucketing in everything else that you have to pay, software costs and whatnot. Because if you don't do that, these smaller things can really creep up on you. So you'll see there, I won't go through all of them, but some averages and some benchmarks. These are the sort of details where it's really important to get a high degree of financial clarity so that, yeah, there are probably some big things you can do that make a bigger difference than these sort of things. But once you get down to this level and you're drilling in here, you can really start to optimize your profitability on a much more substantial basis and bite off that last like 20 or 25% of opportunity.
In terms of churn, door churn, for for the portfolio, every property management company obviously has to deal with this. It's understandable. But when we're measuring it, what's kind of, average when we're looking at a churn ratio for our doors?
Yeah, this has gotten a lot more attention lately, and I'm really happy about that. The reason it's gotten so much attention lately is because of market factors. A lot of people are seeing their doors go out the back door, so to speak, at a pretty alarming rate. People just being like, my property won't rent. I want to get out of here. I just don't want to do this anymore. And so what that's leading to is a really good conversation in the industry about the move away, not away from property management, but towards more of an asset management frame of mind and asset management standpoint, because we call churn the silent killer. And it's silent until it's not silent. It's silent until you look at your unit count and you're like, man, we're bringing in 10, 15 doors a month. Why is our unit count going down? Well, it's because you're losing 15 or 20 units a month. And there are way too many companies who are experiencing that. The average churn in property management, I mean, this is kind of wild. It's 20%. So across the industry, the average company will lose 1/5 of all of its doors every year. And unless you're also replacing 1/5 of your doors every year, you're net losing. But the benchmark for the top 25 is 10%. And that's a really healthy number, right? You can live in a world where if you have, let's say, 500 doors, you can lose 50 a year, because at that level of operation, you probably have enough going on to be able to have a business development person. And that would only require 5 or 6 new doors, really 4 or 5 new doors a month to replace that. And that's usually pretty easy to do at that level of scale. But if you were losing 100 doors a year, that's a little bit different of a situation. So churn, there are lots of factors into what drives churn. Tenant satisfaction, right? Probably the biggest thing that drives churn is vacancy. Long vacancy periods make people question whether or not this is the right investment, the right thing to do with their money. They start paying the mortgage every month, having to use their own funds and not the funds they're receiving from rent distributions. So, upstream of that is tenant satisfaction. And we've seen a lot of talk in the industry over the last few years about resident satisfaction and resident experience because happy residents stay in houses longer, which leads to less vacancy, which leads to less churn, which is better for the PM company. So yeah, churn is a big deal.
I imagine the six pillars kind of like the other side of the coin based off of what you were talking about in terms of being able to replace doors, and this goes to unit acquisition costs. How does this relate to profitability, and what are you looking at metric-wise here?
Yeah, this metric is really important because a lot of companies, and I've been guilty of this as an operator myself, you are trying to do everything you can. You're throwing things at the wall in order to generate new business, realtor referrals, Google ads, Facebook ads, radio programs, television commercials, newspaper ads, you name it. And if you're not tracking that spend really closely to understand how many dollars do I actually have to spend in order to get a new unit, and that's what this is. This isn't owner acquisition cost. This is unit acquisition cost. So obviously, one of the best ways to lower unit acquisition cost is to find someone who has 10 units. And so you land one owner, but you land 10 units. That'll obviously help quite a bit with your UAC. But yeah, the question is, does more advertising dollars mean more growth? And here are your averages and your benchmarks. The average company spends almost twice as much as the benchmark company to acquire a new unit. And I think this is really helpful because yes, market differentials matter here. If you live in a really expensive advertising market or a really dense metro area, you might have to pay more in order to get more. But a lot of people don't even know like what what is realistic for me to spend on unit acquisition cost. I don't know. I'm just throwing money on it. But you can look at this and be like, oh wow, I'm spending $3,000 to get a client or to get a unit. And, relative to everyone else in the industry, I'm way overspending. There's something wrong with my marketing. And that's the trigger to dive in and to try to figure that out.
Perfect, perfect. Well, let's shift gears now and talk a little bit about how we can actually scale and implement strategies that increase profitability. So when it comes to scalability, how do you personally like to kind of begin thinking about it so that this process goes successfully?
Yeah, so this is the part where we really dive into the self-managing aspect of property management, right? You got to have both. Yeah, a highly profitable company without self-management is just a bigger fire to put out every day. And then a self-managing company without any profit is a nice way to drive yourself into bankruptcy. So you have to address both sides of the coin. And the way that I suggest that people address the self-managing part is are you building systems and are you developing people who are scalable? So as the company grows and as your ambitions grow and as you have more success, do you actually have the infrastructure, both from a person standpoint and a process standpoint, in order to handle that growth? So scalability is the answer. That's the ability of a person or process or product to handle a growing amount of work. Or in this case, we're talking for a lot of us about the potential to be enlarged to accommodate that growth. Even if you're not in high growth mode, frankly, you never know when that's going to happen. Like you might be doing all sorts of things to try to get into growth mode, and it might just be you hit the nail on the head at some point. Are you sure that your team and your processes are ready for that growth? The other thing we just don't have a lot of control over is the macroeconomic environment. Yeah, right now it's kind of difficult to grow your PM company. There are a lot of factors against you. As we've seen in the last year or so, and especially in the last few months, that kind of stuff can change really fast. So you need to make sure that you have dialed in your success criteria, the things that you know that need to be true in order for you to be successful, so that when the opportunity presents itself, you really can take it and run with it.
That makes sense. In terms of just kind of executing scale, what mindset in the sense of like, crawl, walk, run, how fast should they really be starting to move forward with these strategies?
Yeah, I'll give you four keys to scaling people and mindset shifts here. One of them is I call it move fast and try not to break things. So Mark Zuckerberg had this famous quote. I think it was like the official Facebook motto for many years, which was move fast and break things. And that was a different time, right? That was a time when there was not much regulation over big tech and their sort of scaling operations. So that got him into a little bit of trouble, but we won't talk about that. What we want to do as property management companies is we want to move fast, but we don't want to do so in a way that's just super destructive in the business. And I had to learn this the hard way a little bit at my last company, just trying to do too much, trying to implement too much, trying to go too fast, and not bringing the team along with me. But I would say, and feel very strongly about this, that if you're going to err on one side, I would err on that side. If you are sitting in a place where you're like, I don't want to touch anything, I don't want to move anything, I'm so scared to break something, I'm so scared to upset the apple cart or ruffle some feathers. Um, you're in a place where you're very, very vulnerable because we are in an industry that has been a little bit of a sleeping giant for many years, and it's no longer asleep. There is so much disruption in our space between acquirers who are coming in and scooping up PM companies, venture-backed startups that are trying to scale PM operations. The level of technology development and investment in property management in the last few years is wild. I mean, it's billions of dollars. So if you're not actively looking to grow and scale and operate with some sense of urgency, I call it speed under control, then you are kind of a sitting duck for someone who is looking for a little bit of disruption and a little bit of speed. So move fast and try not to break things. But understand that sometimes you might break some things.
Looking at the next one and developing scalable people and mindsets, we know that sometimes this can have growing pains and maybe be a little uncomfortable. In terms of that, and someone who's maybe trying to 10x, why is this actually a good thing, and how should they maybe approach these feelings and be able to manage them?
Yeah, get comfortable being uncomfortable. If you're going to develop scalable people, you have to get comfortable being uncomfortable personally, because it's a lot of hard conversations, and you have to coach your people to do so as well. If you're going to achieve those goals, you're going to be pushed, you're going to be stretched. There's a little animation there of like a physical therapist. The only way to heal and to grow is to exercise that muscle, and that's painful. It doesn't always feel good, but it's such an important principle in order to scale. It gives your people the opportunity to grow. And if you are saying to yourself, well, if I was to stretch my people, if I was to call them to a level of uncomfortability, they would just leave. I would say you should probably let them leave. If they don't want to grow, if they're there just to do a job and that's what they want to do for the rest of their life, and they have no intention of getting better, getting faster, being more efficient, innovating, I'd ask yourself if that's really who you trust with the business that you own and the business that you've poured so much of your time into. But as you're doing this, another principle is just to build on the foundation that you've already laid. If you're at this point in your journey and you've got a established property management company, you've probably built a good foundation on a number of things. And I would say don't necessarily look to break down or tear down that foundation, but build on it in a way that is iterative and incremental. So a phrase I often use with our team is incremental uncomfortability. I'm not talking about coming in and being like, all right, everybody, everything's about to change. It's not that. It's a targeted approach to we're going to try new things. We're going to be open to the possibility of failure, but we're not going to do everything all at once.
I love it. I love it. I know part of this and the keys that you've been talking about is, do you have the team or the infrastructure in place to be able to be successful? So as we're considering team members who can help us, do this and achieve our goals, what should we be focusing on and asking of people to maximize them?
Yes, there's a great principle here. It's from Dan Sullivan. It's called Who Not How, which is the principle that when I'm faced with a problem to solve, my first question should not be, how can I get this done? My first question should be, who can help me get this done? If we try to do everything ourselves, our work will be governed by our own limitations, right? We all have strengths and weaknesses. And I think as much as possible, we should be looking to see who might be able to accomplish something even better than we could do it. Because the likelihood that you are the best in the world at absolutely everything is pretty low. And the likelihood that you're the best in the world at everything, even in your own company, even if it's small, is also pretty low. Again, if you're better than everyone on your team at everything that's done, either you are just living on a different planet than the rest of us, or you may have a team of underperformers, right? There should be strengths that you can leverage on your team. And one critique that you hear about this is, that sounds great for managers, entrepreneurs, and CEOs. They get to delegate, but it doesn't really apply to me because no one works directly to me. That's actually a misunderstanding of this principle. Who would be able to help me with this is not a question that has to be answered by someone who works directly for you or someone who's underneath you. In fact, it's often the opposite. It's somebody who's on level with you or somebody who's above you. And it needs to be within the context of a collaborative culture. So creating the sort of culture where people are comfortable to make the request and to make the ask and not feel like if they ask for help, they're going to be told, well, why are you so incompetent? Or shouldn't you be able to figure that out yourself? The answer to shouldn't you be able to figure that out yourself is probably yes. Yes, I could figure that out myself. I could figure out how to program how to build this process in the software, but you know how to do it. You've been trained on that. Let's save 6 hours of employee labor. Again, talking direct labor efficiency right there. And let's do this together. And you can show me how, and you can help me with this because you're the right person to help with this. It's not like, hey, Brad, go figure it out.
I love that. That makes a lot of sense. And I also like how you make a distinction in who we're actually targeting, as we're going about this. So I know one area that seems like it's probably overlooked, but I really liked about it when we were going over the content is you stressed aiming for fun. And you had different types of fun that you kind of look
Yes.
at. Can you talk about which one you really strive for and just kind of the types?
Yeah. So I don't know where this came from. It's not original to me, but I've learned to apply this in my life. It's called type two fun. All right. So in this world, there are three types of fun. Type one fun is just what most people would call fun. It's like it's going to the beach, it's going to a sporting event, it's playing at a park with your kids or with your friends or whatever. That's type one fun. It's fun while it's happening. It's fun when you look back. Great. Type two fun is a unique type of fun. It's the sort of fun where it is not fun at all when it's happening, but you look back on it and you're like, that was fun. The experience was fun. The challenge was fun. Overcoming the challenge was fun, but it's not fun while it's happening. And then there is actually a third type of fun, which is called type three fun. And that's where it was never fun. It was not fun while you were doing it. It's not fun afterwards. And I strongly recommend that you avoid type three fun as much as possible because it's not fun. Scaling a company and scaling people is type two fun. It is difficult work, and anyone who's invested in the growth of other people can attest to this. The growing pains, we are talking about, the physical therapist stretching the muscle. The growing pains can be substantial, and the work involved in helping someone become and achieve more than they thought possible, and someone helping you become and achieve more than you thought possible, that is not fun while it's happening. There's often tears, there's sadness, there's self doubt, there's all kinds of mess involved. But again, as anyone who's ever done this knows, when you look back on it and you're with that person and you're like, man, look at where you started when you look at where you were when you started 3 years ago, and look at where you are now. And you think about that journey and you feel that like satisfaction and love, right? In that moment, you're like, man, that actually was fun. That journey was fun. I'm looking back on it. It was really hard, but it was fun. Scalable work is almost always type two fun.
So as we actually now get into, you know, creating these scalable processes, when it comes to decision making, how do you kind of approach this and think the best way to kind of attack decision making is?
Yeah. So the first one, I've got a few here, is delegate decision making authority. That doesn't mean necessarily delegating work. That means delegating actually authority. And I put the phrase on here, turn the ship around, because there's a great book that I've read that I would recommend to you if you haven't, especially if you're if you're in a work situation where you really feel like you could use a bit of a reset, or your company needs to make a pivot, needs to be turned around in some ways. It's really helpful because the point is that the person closest to the information should make the decisions. The guy who wrote this was a naval sub commander, and he was a pretty good one. So they put him in charge of the worst performing submarine in the entire naval fleet. And the spoiler alert that is that in the matter of a few years, he turned it into the highest performing submarine in the naval fleet. And the way he did that was he didn't just tell people what to do, who told people what to do, who told people what to do. He delegated decision making authority as far down as possible so that the people who are actually working with the information don't just make a recommendation up to someone else who can make a decision. They actually get to make the decision themselves. So, an example of this is if you're him, you're the captain of the ship, you have a guy or gal who is the navigator, and they look at the map all day long, and they know what the destination is, and it's their job to be the one to navigate the ship, or at least say where it's supposed to go. Um, it would be very foolish for the commander to just make the statement like, we should go, this is the way that we should get there, versus that person actually saying, the commander saying to that person, like, here's the destination I want to get to. You tell me how we ought to get there, and you decide what course we're going to take, because you're looking at a map all day. I'm doing 1,000 other things. I don't have time to really look at the map and understand it like you do. Therefore, I'm delegating the authority of, it's my decision of where we're going, and you get to make the decision of how we're getting there. And that principle can be applied in property management in so many ways. Rather, as a property manager, than calling your assistant PM into your office and having a conversation of like, all right, bring me up to speed so I can figure out what to do with this situation. It's like, no, you know the information. You live in this world all day long. You can come to me if you need a recommendation, but you ought to be the one who actually makes a decision and moves the ball forward. So rather than just delegating work to report back to you, delegate authority so that every decision that you don't have to make yourself, someone else can make, someone you trust can make on your behalf.
I think this one kind of relates to your principles, the four keys that you were talking about earlier, in the sense of trying to, work fast but not break things. But in terms of the drive for perfection, how have you seen that kind of hinder a PM's or a property management company's ability really to scale?
For sure. Perfect can definitely be the enemy of great. Good is the enemy of great, and settling for good. But perfect is just as much of an enemy. And the biggest reason is it really suppresses the ability to scale. If you're not thinking in mostly 80/20 or 90/10 type mindsets of how can we get this as materially complete as possible, and then creating a plan to finish the rest, but focusing on speed to this is good, or this is really good. Um, if you are waiting until something is absolutely perfect, which by the way, the problem with that, first of all, is that usually nothing gets to perfect. But if you're waiting for perfect, then you're going to be slowing down so much. It actually leads to procrastination, which is really interesting. As I've been thinking about this, a lot of people put off projects or put off segments of projects because they have some unrealistic perfect standard in their mind. and they're so intimidated by it that they don't even start and they're not willing to put in the work. But if you can establish beforehand when you're working on something, what would it look like for this to be at 80% or for this to be really, really good? And then you're like, all right, that's a standard that I can actually attain. You'll actually do the work and not put it off because you have some fear of failure of not making it perfect. Like I said on there too, like it slows down decision making because you have to think through every decision in terms of the perfect standard and how you get to it. And then at the end of the day, it discourages risk taking. If you've created an environment where perfection is the standard and only the best will do, no one is ever going to innovate. No one's ever going to take risks. No one's ever going to try new things because they're so afraid of failing to meet the perfect standard that you've set. So I would say, perfectionism, as lauded as it can be in our society and in our business culture, I think you should get rid of it because it's just not realistic. Maybe there's one exception here in property management, and that's trust accounting. Your trust accounting and your handling of other people's money should basically be perfect. You can't make mistakes. But everything else in PM, like, go for really great. Don't go for perfect.
I think this next one kind of ties into the enemy, how perfection can be an enemy. But sometimes when we're striving for perfect or something, we tend to overcomplicate things or systems. So, can you kind of talk about how you like to approach creating scalable processes so that we're either improving on it, iterating the process, or just avoiding overcomplicating it in general?
Yeah, so we look at process through the lens of the algorithm. The algorithm comes from Elon Musk. He has created this and has been using this in his businesses for many, many years. I read his biography over the summer, or sorry, excuse me, over last winter, and just found this to be such a compelling way to improve nearly anything. But it's this five-step algorithm, which is you first question every requirement. So you're looking at a process, you're looking at here's a great example, very practical. You're looking at a maintenance request process, and you see all your requirements in there, all the milestones you have to complete in order to get through the maintenance request. And you come across something like owner approval. You should question that requirement. Is it absolutely necessary? Is there a world in which I could have a maintenance request where I don't have to get owner approval in order to fulfill it? That is the biggest bottleneck in basically every maintenance request process, at least the speed to getting something repaired. It's the owner. I have to get their approval. We have to come back. Then I have to dispatch the vendor, and then we can get the thing repaired. Question every requirement, like literally every single one of them, and ask yourself, is there a world in which we could do without this? And the answer to owner approval is absolutely. There are lots of things you can build into your property management agreement that gives you the authority to make certain repairs without asking the owner. And you should be pushing things like that as much as possible to streamline your processes. Um, After you've done that, you've questioned every requirement, delete any part or process you can. Sometimes you can delete entire processes, but certainly there are parts of every process that you can live without the process actually breaking. And then after that, you've stripped it down, you simplify it, and you optimize it as much as possible. Accelerate cycle time just means ask yourself, how quickly can this go? How fast can we make this process? How efficient could this possibly be? And then the most important part to remember about process improvement is always this last one. Introduce automation last. The last thing you want to do, but the most common thing we see people do, because we help people with their property management processes all the time, is automate parts of a process that don't need to exist or automate an inefficient process. All you're doing is making something that doesn't work well go a little faster when really you could cut way more off if you stripped it all the way down and rebuilt it before you actually automated. So everyone gets excited about software and they're like, I'm going to automate everything I do. And you should step back and say, is what I'm doing actually best? Is it most efficient? Is it as simple as it could be? That's when you introduce automation.
I love it. I love it. Well, Brad, this was a lot of really great information, a lot of actionable items that people can start working on so they can start attacking and becoming more profitable in their PM businesses. We really appreciate you presenting all of this content to us. We're going to move on now into just our next steps and also our Q&A so that we can get a few questions answered if anyone has that. But we have some really, straightforward next steps for everyone. And the first one is, and we talked about this a little bit, but define your mountain. Let's understand what that mountain looks like, what goes into it, what considerations do we need to be taking into account. Let's also start getting clarity on our goals, understanding where we're going. If you're getting in the car, you don't just start driving. You typically say, "Hey, where am I headed?" We have a destination in mind. We've, maybe used a SMART process where we have been very diligent in defining it and giving ourselves metrics and, how we're going to track it. So let's make sure we're getting clarity on those goals. And then the next thing here is let's schedule a free business performance audit with Brad. Brad is an expert in this. On the next slide, I'm going to have a QR code as we sit in the Q&A area that you can scan and go ahead and get that set up. So I would really encourage you all, if you're serious about trying to optimize not just your profitability, but your scale and your processes, let's go ahead and talk to him and see where we're at and where we can improve. So we are going to open it up for Q&A. If anyone has any questions, please go ahead and drop those in and we will get those answers to you. While you guys are getting your questions in, if you want to connect directly with Brad, I'm going to drop his LinkedIn URL right now in the chat area for everyone so that y'all can see it. And let me get that to y'all. So if anyone wants to directly connect with him, there is his LinkedIn. And then I do see questions from Lindsay and Naya regarding the replay and the slide deck. Yes, we are going to have the replay out to everyone. You should get it tomorrow, and we will include the slides for y'all. So for anyone who wants to just review it or look at the slide deck, we'll definitely make sure we get you those. So as we're waiting for questions, Brad, as we're kind of looking at these metrics, are there any that you didn't talk about that you probably like, if you were to say, let's take it a step further, is there a seventh metric that you like to highlight or one that you find kind of gets buried that just doesn't get enough attention but should?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll spin it a slightly different direction, which is to say there are far more financial KPIs that you can look at that I think do make a difference and do move the needle. But where I would go if you're looking to optimize and you're looking for more metrics to track that will really move the needle on your finances, I would head over to your operational KPIs. I think that's a pretty big gap in the industry right now is, okay, we've got the NARPM chart of accounts. There's been a lot of work done on the financial clarity side. And we at ProfitCoach have been doing quite a bit of work on the operations side, particularly developing the PM operations standards, which is a free resource for anyone to look through. That has, I think, 79 metrics that you can track on your operations. Those are mostly process metrics. So think like days on market, days without revenue, which is basically how many days between revenue generation from one lease to another are you at? Like that's typically been called days vacant, but days vacant actually doesn't matter that much. Your owner doesn't care about days vacant. They don't care about their property being vacant. They care about what happens when their property is vacant, which is they don't make any money. They would be happy for their property to be vacant if someone was paying rent. So days vacant is the wrong metric. Days without revenue is the actual metric there that really moves the needle. There was a really interesting study that came out in the fall called the PM Trends Report. And the PM Trends Report was a nationwide landlord study. And what it revealed was that the reason why so many so many landlords hire a property management company, the number one reason is usually maintenance. They don't want to deal with it's finding a tenant, which is not as hard as it used to be because of things like Facebook, Craigslist, Zillow, things like that. But it's usually maintenance, and they hire PMs because they don't want to deal with contractors. They don't want to deal with sending people out. And then within maintenance, the thing that they care so much about is this metric called speed to repair. They want They care about the tenant experience, resident experience quite a bit because they don't want to, or they want their tenant to have a good experience so that they stay, because it's always cheaper to pay a renewal fee to the PM company than to process a turnover and the hundreds or thousands of dollars it takes to turn a unit over. So speed to repair is a big metric that I think is a pretty good leading indicator of whether or not your tenants are going to churn. So you should be tracking that. I will go ahead and put the actually, you have to do it. It doesn't look like I can. The link there is pmopsstandards.com. That's a free resource that lets you dive deep into the operations metrics and the process metrics that matter the most. We created those in the fall, and that's free to download. And you're welcome to take a good look at that and see how you might implement that into your business. And then we do quite a bit of work with our clients, helping them implement the PMOps standards into their business and helping them build out their processes for maximum efficiency.
Brad, you kind of talked about it a little bit here when you were talking to speed to repair, but one of the things that was kind of sticking out when you were going over churn regarding to, doors for your portfolio, and you were talking about, resident satisfaction and things that are keeping your residents happy and keeping them there. What are some of the, programs or kind of principles do you recommend for people who are maybe focusing on either measuring satisfaction or looking to improve it? Are there a few things you can recommend?
Yeah, as far as measuring resident satisfaction, I really think that you should do that if you're not doing that. There are a number of traditional ways to do that. One of them is Google reviews. That's okay. It's a really lagging indicator. It's also a point in time snapshot. You know this if you run a PM company because you either get a Google review from a tenant that's like, I had this big problem, they fixed it right away, this place is the best. Or more likely from the tenant side, you get a Google review of like, these people are the worst because of X, Y, or Z, which, may or may not be true. But what you should be tracking is an NPS score. I don't know if everyone here uses NPS. We used it at Sawyer. You can use CSAT, CES, customer experience score, customer satisfaction score. I like NPS because NPS measures not just does someone have a favorable opinion of you, but are you delivering an experience that actually creates fans, creates people who want to refer their friends out to you? The question is, how likely would you be to recommend XYZ property management company to a friend or family member? And if you get a 9 or a 10, it's a positive. And if you get a 0 to a 6, it's a 0 to a 7, it's a negative. And then, no, sorry, 0 to 6. And then 7 and 8 are neutral. So in order to have a positive NPS score, a score over 0, you actually have to have more 9s and 10s than 0 to 6s. That's pretty hard to do from a tenant standpoint, but it is absolutely possible. And you might be scared of the results if you were to put out an NPS score, but you can't change your tenant experience. You can't change where things are unless you have a really good understanding of where things currently stand. So I'm sure there are lots of tools out there. The one that I hear a lot of folks use recently is Retently. They do NPS scoring. But yeah, there are lots of ways to do that and to measure your NPS score. You can also do it yourself and attach it to the end of a maintenance request. Like a maintenance request gets canceled out, and you have some sort of automation to send out a survey or a question or a link or something like that. So there are lots of ways to do that.
Perfect, perfect. Well, Brad, this was a great presentation. I really appreciate you taking the time. It looks like we are all out of questions here, so we will wrap up here and let everyone go. But before we depart, do you have any kind of final words of encouragement or any kind of final considerations you'd like people to just kind of keep in the back of their minds as they start running forward?
Yeah, thanks for that question. It's a really good one. I would say that the key to lasting profit in property management is really two things. It's to have a mindset and an attitude of gratefulness. There is there are a million things to complain about every day, particularly if you run a property management company. You've got tough tenants, you've got tough owners, you might have tough team members, but understand that you have been, if you're running a PM company or you're a property manager, you've been given a whole lot to steward those owners, those tenants, those team members, and keeping your head up and saying, man, I'm really grateful that I have the opportunity to make an impact on so many different people's lives. So the gratitude focus and focusing on the things in your business that actually really drive results. Things like the 6 keys to financial performance that we just talked about, some of those operational KPIs, not getting distracted by crazy opportunities or shiny objects that have nothing to do with what you do, but staying honed in on the things that drive performance and keeping that attitude of gratefulness and gratitude towards everything that you've been given. That's the key to building lasting profit in property management that maybe even transcends your lifetime.
I love it. I love it. And I also like how you talk about kind of the long-term mindset there. There was a tip that I heard a long time ago. They called it the farmer and the magician. And
Mm.
basically say the magician comes in a poof of smoke and he promises you, all sorts of results and stuff. And just like that, he also vanishes, and you don't have yields and, they kind of the shiny object kind of syndrome. But the farmer, they're out there out there in the yard and they're farming every day, putting in the hard work, and you don't see the yield. But then
Mm.
at the end of the summer, they've got a crop and a bounty, and it's plentiful. And while it's not like the most glamorous or shiny, it points to that, staying focused and putting the work
Yeah,
in and understanding it. So I always, when I hear that, it always brings back that farmer and magician tip that I read a long, long time ago.
that's
So
awesome. I love that analogy. It's really good.
yeah, so it's a good way to think about it. Well, Brad, thank you so much. You've been very generous with your time, and the content has been amazing. I know there's a lot of people who are benefiting from it. So thank you so much for
Yeah.
presenting to our audience, and I hope everyone has a wonderful day.